Based on today's end-of-year interviews, sounds like there's a really high probability, more than ever before, that a Jack Eichel trade happens very, very soon. Today we're going to discuss some quotes from Eichel, where might he go and how might this play out, and that's coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, yes, I know, once again, we're talking about Jack Eichel. It's a topic that we've talked about a decent bit here in the last probably 2, 3, 4 weeks. Based on media availability today and a lot of the quotes from some of these players, including many from Eichel that we're going to take a look at, it's really kind of eye-opening here that this really appears to be off the rails in a relationship that I'm really not convinced is repairable at this point in time. Now, we've talked like I said, a few other times here recently about the deteriorating relationship between Eichel and the Sabres, the lack of success, and there's a lot of off-ice stuff happening as well that we kind of knew a little bit about, but learned a little bit more about here today. And like I said, that's kind of led me to the conclusion that I really think it's best for everybody here just to move on. But you know, the sad part is here, Eichel's not the only decent top player that I think could be in for a trade or that would prefer to be moved on from. We're also going to take a look at some of the comments here from Rasmus Ristolainen and Sam Reinhart. It's really a bad situation in Buffalo. We already knew it was bad, but I think it's a lot worse than many of us even kind of figured here. So let's take a look at some of the quotes from Jack Eichel from today's media availability. We're going to go through a list of tweets. A lot of this was put out on Twitter by John Vogels, the athletic writer for the Buffalo Sabres, and he kind of breaks this down very point by point. And there's some of this is just information, some of his actual quotes from Eichel himself here. But obviously, Jack Eichel's list of injuries for starters is a lot longer than we were aware of, at least as far as I was aware of. And let's take a look at what Vogel put on Twitter regarding the injuries. It says here that according to the Sabres captain himself, not only has he been dealing with a herniated disc in his neck, but he's also had an ankle sprain, a broken rib suffered before the season, and an abdominal injury suffered last season that continues to linger and is still considered unresolved. Now, the last we had heard about Eichel and the herniated disc in his neck, it sounded like he was heading for surgery and that he should be having surgery in early May, with the anticipation that he'd be making a full recovery and be good to go ahead of training camp come this fall. Well, things have certainly changed a little bit, and a lot of that seems to be due to a conflict there, or a difference of opinion, I guess we could say, between Eichel and the medical training staff on the Buffalo Sabres and their team doctors. One of the quotes here, which I'll show you here, from Eichel himself says that there has been a disconnect between him and the Sabres regarding his injuries. He said he'd be lying if he said things went smoothly. He says his main goal is to be ready to play next season, wherever that may be. So clearly the frustration was apparent. It was not, something that he was hiding. And it's not the first time. Like, same thing last offseason as well. He was, pretty clear with his emotions. And this is different. Not only is he frustrated about the lack of success with the team, talk about a major disconnect on how to handle his health and his injuries. Now, he was also asked basically, like, isn't it kind of your body, your choice? But he said it's not that simple when you're under contract to the NHL teams. They certainly have a lot of say over what you can and cannot do. Now, I do believe under the NHLPA agreement regarding all the medical stuff here, I do believe that if a player does not agree with the team doctors, that they can seek a second opinion. And depending if they still can't come to an agreement, I believe there's like an arbitration process. And at this point, it's not really clear if Eichel has filed one of those, or filed a grievance under that, or where things stand exactly. But to say that there's a major disconnect with how to handle the injuries and how to handle his health, it just goes to show that there's really not much there for trust. He doesn't trust not only that they're going to put a good product on the ice, but he's not even trusting that they know what they're doing and capable to look after to keep him to be a healthy young man. So, wow, like, this is just getting worse here. Like, we already knew there was something like medically going on, and I wondered if there might have been some kind of disagreement between himself and the team medical people, just because things seemed to be dragging on so long for him to have the proper surgery. But clearly, this is getting really out of hand here. It's a really ugly situation. Like I said, we also had comments from Rasmus Ristolainen, who made it clear to GM Kevin Adams that he is totally okay with being traded, but he doesn't mind staying. Like, he kind of said, I don't care, like, whatever. Like, just another year, of frustration, losses, and another year getting closer to having his contract done, and we'll go from there. Now, Sam Reinhart's also a pending RFA. And obviously, Reinhart's probably their best player this year. I believe he was just given the team MVP award. Certainly had a strong season. Been a good player for them his whole career, really. Shown steady growth and improvement. 26 years old now. Only a year away from being an unrestricted free agent. And when asked about his future, here's what he had to say. In terms of the future, don't really have much for you right now. I'm going to take some time, and so that's stuff that's all going to be figured out when the time comes. No one wants to go through a rebuild, especially going into next year, turning 26, start of or close to the start of the season. Tough not being able to play meaningful games down the stretch. So basically, what Eichel was saying last offseason is now being echoed by not only himself, but some of his teammates, including Reinhart. So, Reinhart doesn't have a contract. Could he even force their hand to be moved? I mean, you have to think that there's no way that they're going to be able to convince these guys that they can make a ton of changes and field a competitive team that can compete for a playoff spot as early as next season. I personally don't see how that's even possible. I mean, it's absolutely nuts to think that they could go from being a basement dweller to a playoff team in a single year. I mean, look at last year, though. When you look at all the stuff we saw behind the scenes with Kevin Adams and the owners of Peculas, and when they were talking about signing Taylor Hall, the owners were convinced that signing Taylor Hall was going to make them not only a team that could compete for the playoffs, but a team that would be competing for a Stanley Cup. That's how bad things are there, that they're out to lunch that way. They don't seem to understand, those guys as owners, what it really takes to run a hockey team and what it takes to put a competitive, solid team on the ice, in my opinion. Like, that's delusional. I really feel bad for the Sabres fans. You guys have been so patient for a decade plus trying to get a competitive hockey team again since the last time the Sabres were really relevant and making noise. You've had some good drafts. You get some good players as they come along here in the last 6-7 years, like Eichel and Reinhart and Risto and all these players that have a lot of potential. You brought in Taylor Hall. You brought in Jeff Skinner. Even the Kyle Okposo contract, which is terrible now, it didn't really look good from the beginning, to be honest, but still, he was a more productive player that was still younger coming over from the Islanders. Like, they've made so many moves that are just blown up in their face. It's just total mismanagement, and you have to think that where Eichel is at and Reinhart, that sounds to me like they've just had absolutely enough, and that they're ready to move on. I mean, like I said, when Eichel's using words like disconnect and frustrated, and I've got a lot of thinking to do this offseason, he said, we can't confirm that he's requested a trade or not, but it sounds like if he hasn't officially done so, that it's pretty much coming. And if they were oblivious to the fact on how he was feeling before, I can't imagine that he's that they're oblivious anymore. I would hope not. Now, I guess another thing to keep in mind is, does the team want to be equally as bad next year? It makes you wonder, because if they're delaying off the surgery for Eichel, like, do they not want him to play? Did they not want him to come back this year? Were they worried that they might win a few extra games and move up in the standings? Like, it's really mind-boggling. And if it just drags on long enough here, and if he has to go through an appeal process or whatever, arbitration, all that to get his surgery, like, he might not end up being ready for next year. And if that's the case, trading him is going to be awfully difficult when he's not healthy, and having him in their lineup, again, will also be very difficult, which means they're going to be an even worse team without him. So it's hard to wrap your head around all the mess in Buffalo. Now, another thing, too, is Eichel does have a no-move clause in his contract, but it's not kicked in yet. They can make the trade happen this year and avoid that and have all the control. But ultimately, the longer they wait, if this goes on much longer, he'll have the control, and then they're going to have their hands tied, just like they had with Taylor Hall. They didn't get a good return on Hall. He's doing very well in Boston. They gave up Curtis Lazar as well. And, we'll see how Anders Bjork does in Buffalo, but was that a good enough return for what they gave up? Not even close, but they had no leverage. The Bruins had all the cards here. They had all the leverage. Don Sweeney's like, he wants to come play with us. I'm not increasing my offer because he's not going to wait for any other team. I'm not worried about other offers. because he wants to come here. And they knew that. So they took advantage of it. And the same thing could happen with Eichel. Will they try to accommodate him? I don't know if they really need to. They need to get the best offer. But ultimately, in this article here as well from John Vogel, there is also some other talk here in The Athletic. They also talk about who would be the contenders for Eichel. And they seem to say, what I've been saying for a while is that it starts and ends with the New York Rangers. There's the Rangers and then there's everybody else. The Rangers are an appealing option for a variety of reasons, probably be right at the top of his list given the fact that it's a big market. There's a team that's on the rise. They have a ton of young talent. They've obviously, might not have had the absolute greatest last couple of seasons, but they're going through a rebuild. The owner's impatient and wants to take it up a notch, which is why I was saying just 4 or 5 days ago that an Eichel trade to the Rangers is probably even more likely now, given the fact that they fired Gorton and Davidson and brought in Drury. James Dolan is known to be an impulsive, erratic owner, and he wants results. He wants them now. That's why I fully suspect them to make a massive trade and try to take this team a major step forward this offseason. We already know the Rangers were pushing last offseason for Eichel, and the Sabres were not ready to pull the trigger. So I really think, given everything they have on their roster and in their prospect pool, as I've talked about before, it's going to take 4 or 5 assets to get Eichel, and I think the Rangers could put together one heck of a package. Now, I've also put the teams like the Kings and the Ducks on the thumbnail because I think they're probably the next closest contenders. I think other teams, there's many other teams that would call and inquire and make an attempt at it. I just don't know if they could really come close and if it really makes a ton of sense. And I think the Kings could make an offer just as good as the Rangers. The Ducks, not so much. You get the Minnesota Wild, the Boston Bruins. They're all teams that would probably check in and see what they could do because it would be very intriguing for them. I just don't think they have the right assets. Whereas, like I said about the Rangers, they have so many solid young defensemen. Obviously we talked about guys like Keandre Miller. They just extended Ryan Lindgren today. I don't think he's going anywhere. They've got Fox and Trouba and Lindgren. You've got Miller. You've got Zach Jones. You've got Braden Schneider in the minors. You have Lundqvist coming over from Europe. They could afford to move at least one of those guys, maybe even 2. You've got some great young forwards. They'd have to include a guy like a Kakko or Lafreniere. Probably Kakko would be the preferred one to go, I believe. And then you have some roster options that could be included. Maybe they move a Mika Zibanejad or a Ryan Strome because obviously the Sabres are really going to want a center iceman back. Maybe it's Philip Pedal. That's another possibility. One of their centers would have to be included. You throw in like I said here, one of the young prospect, or not really prospect, but a good young solid forward, a young solid D, probably a first round pick. And then you've got yourself a pretty good package there. I mean, the Sabres would have a few pieces that could help them right away, and they would get 1 or 2 pieces that would probably be a year or 2 out from having an impact. And as much as it's going to be hard to win any trades involving this player, it's, that's a pretty good deal. You're not going to do a whole lot better than that, I don't think. I mean, the Kings, like I said, they have some intriguing guys too. You have lots of center guys, like young centers that are either prospects or current players like Velarde and Turcotte and Kupari, like Quentin Byfield, one of those guys could be in there. You could throw in a prospect or younger defenseman like a Cale Clegg, for example. Maybe a Sean Dursey, a first-round pick. And so they have all kinds of other decent forwards. You've got Kaliev, you've got Anderson Dolan, you got Samuel Fagemo. The list goes on. You could easily throw 2 to 3 really solid top young players in a mix with a first-round pick or something, and boom, you got a really solid package from the Kings too. Now the Sabres might prefer to trade him out west, and they don't really have any no move or no trade clauses to deal with, so sky's the limit that way. But still, based on all these comments, this is not going to end well, and I really think the Sabres are going to be a team to watch this offseason as this dumpster fire continues to burn, and we might see more of a mass exodus than we ever thought. Like I said, it's not just Eichel. Reinhart sounds like he might want out as well. Risto's okay with leaving. As much as it might sound crazy, it's possible that things might get worse before they get better. I mean, I don't know. Let me know what you think down below, but these comments from Eichel, especially if you're a Sabres fan, have to be awfully concerning, and you have to think here that this relationship is really near on its last legs here and about to end here in the offseason. If you're new to the channel, subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news from around the entire league. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.